Good morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where Disney, having squared away Harrison Ford, now tries to find the next Harrison Ford. Yes, Disney has made Harrison Ford very happy, and in doing so have made him actually a commodity for the studio. They gave him his wish with The Force Awakens, but at the same time were able to bring him back for the seventh film, and of course reaped tremendous results not only at the box office, but with invigorated interest in the franchise, winning over new fans, which is leading of course to the Star Wars lands they're building and the huge number of movies coming down the pipeline, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But then also, of course, yesterday, as we discussed with my episode of the top 5 ideas for Indiana Jones 5, they have greenlit another Indiana Jones movie for 2019, starring Harrison Ford, a franchise he does want to remain a part of. Not just remain a part of, but headline. So again, Harrison Ford now works for the Disney company, and that's not a bad acquisition when you come to think of it. But now, of course, they don't want to give up Han Solo. They were like, if Harrison Ford wants to give up the character, fine, but we're not willing to lose that beloved character. So their solution is to not like recast an older Han Solo, although I had heard some people suggest Dennis Quaid, which I thought was a pretty good suggestion. But they've decided to go with a young Han Solo, and I'm sure if the movie is successful, they would continue to make young Han Solo movies, even though they haven't said they would, or at least use the character in other parts of the universe. Because, they're making, now they have like the core films that are continuing the episodes, but it's interesting that of the 2 spin-off movies they have so far, they're flashbacks. Rogue One takes place right before episode 4, and so would presumably the young Han Solo movie, because, it's obviously taking place, it's supposed to be an origin about how he meets Chewbacca, so it also would have to take place before episode 4. So they're kind of like prequels, but no one's going to use the P word after Lucas destroyed it. So anyway, Disney, even though that movie is also a little bit of a ways off, we haven't even gotten Rogue One yet, later this year, they are very close to finally casting the role. And I suspect that we will have an announcement by the time summer arrives, I would actually suspect, because they're down to their final candidates. So as you might recall, we discussed how they were auditioning everyone, and I actually threw my support behind Ansel Elgort, but that hasn't worked out because he's not on this list. And I had actually, I, like many people, felt Taron Egerton was actually ideal for the role, but he had seemed too busy. He has Kingsman 2, he has Robin Hood that he's doing. It had seemed like he just didn't have time in his schedule. But maybe Disney's willing to work around that if they decide to cast him, which he's my choice. He's my ideal choice. He's always been my ideal choice. I threw my support behind Ansel when I felt that Taron wasn't available. And as soon as I saw Kingsman: The Secret Service, it was like, this guy has star power. And I still feel he has star power after Eddie the Eagle, but no one saw Eddie the Eagle. So I think Disney can get him at a little bit of a discounted price because of that. If I were Taron Egerton, I wouldn't play around with this. If they pick him, I would just sign the contract. Just sign him for like one movie, or with the salary increase, or get some back end. But I think Taron Egerton shouldn't mess around because he's coming off of a very weak release with Eddie the Eagle, and it doesn't put him in a particularly strong negotiating position. So anyway, and also I think Kingsman 2 isn't shaping up so well with Julianne Moore and Halle Berry. I mean, that sounds pretty weak to me. But anyway, who else is on this list? Who is Taron Egerton competing with? Well, Alden Ehrenreich is on the list from Hail Caesar. He was fantastic in Hail Caesar, a breakout performance. He was the best thing in that movie, but unfortunately a lot of people didn't see that movie either. So I hope his agent is sending his scenes around all around town saying, you didn't watch Hail Caesar, could you just at least watch Alden's scenes? And I think he has a great future ahead of him. I just don't think he's Han Solo. Then also Jack Reynor is on this list. Jack Reynor is best known for being in Transformers 4, standing behind Mark Wahlberg. And we'll talk more about him in a second, but I just want to tell you the rest of the list. And then 2 other names that were unsurfaced by a different trade are Jack O'Connell from Angelina Jolie's Unbroken. I don't really see him as Han Solo. I don't think he has the humor. And then Blake Jenner, a.k.a. Mr. Supergirl, who is apparently in this new Richard Linklater movie, Everybody Wants Some, which seems like a colossal waste of time for everybody involved and anyone who goes and sees it. But anyway, after seeing Blake Jenner on Supergirl, where he guest starred opposite his wife, I wouldn't pick him. I think he's a little bit too TV. I don't see as much star power coming off of him as the 2 top, I think, contenders. So they are, of course, obviously Taron Egerton, everyone's first round draft pick. Well, not everyone. I had a spirited Twitter conversation yesterday where someone was not feeling Taron Egerton, but I think he'd be great. But if they are going to go with Taron Egerton, I actually would pick Jack Reynor as my second choice. And you might be like, the guy from Transformers? Have you lost your mind? Well, let explain, because I've actually uncovered some information about Jack Reynor when I was doing my Oscars research that surprised me. And I think that his management team, his representation, he must have a publicist, I would assume. If not, he should get one. Because they're not getting out the story of how he started to get on Hollywood's radar. And that's for making little independent films over in Ireland. Because, for instance, Lenny Abramson, who directed Room and Frank with Michael Fassbender, who was nominated for Best Director, one of his big breakout movies starred Jack Reynor and got a lot of attention, even though it really didn't seem to get a lot of attention here in the States. But Hollywood paid attention to it, and that's how Lenny Abramson started to get more work, and it's how Jack Reynor started to get more work in Hollywood. And he hasn't gotten himself any favors by getting such, crappy roles. But he's in this upcoming movie called Sing Street from the Weinstein Company, which I saw a trailer for in front of Eye in the Sky, which also nobody's paying attention to, but looked pretty good, and Jack Reynor looked pretty funny in it. So I think that a sense of humor is really important to playing Han Solo or any Harrison Ford character. I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize how important Harrison Ford's comedic sensibilities are to his success. So I think you need someone who can do that. And I think that both Taron Egerton and Jack Reynor are the best candidates on this list to fill to pilot the Millennium Falcon. Although one day, of course, in the future, Rey shall pilot it. But anyway, I'm curious, what do you think? Who would be your pick on this list? Are you interested in a young Han Solo movie? And it's really an interesting situation. We'll see how the two films do, Indy 5 and a young Han Solo film. Because everybody's saying with Indy 5, oh, reboot it, get a new Indiana Jones. I'm seeing a lot of those comments. Harrison Ford's too old. But then with Han Solo, I think there are some people who are like, well, no one can be Han Solo but Harrison Ford. So we'll see. I would say that with casting either Taron Egerton or Jack Reynor, I think someone else can be Han Solo. And who would ever thought that would be possible? So I guess maybe there is an Indiana Jones out there. I don't think it's Chris Pratt, though. I think Chris Pratt, has to forge his own path. He's already, so much defined himself as a movie star persona. So anyway, that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is about another new talent to the board coming in a big way, and that's Gal Gadot, who was on Ellen DeGeneres yesterday, and a number of you sent me the link to her interview, and it's posted online. I'll put a link in the video description. But she's just so darn personable. It's a slow news day, if you can't tell. But Gal Gadot was just so personable on Ellen. And, she has this fantastic Israeli accent. I think it really, adds to the feeling of her being, from not America, which I think is very important. I hope that accent is full on in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And not only does she, seem, appropriately exotic and, just really good for the role, but she seems like such a smart, compassionate, wonderful person. I was just really impressed. And they even showed a picture of her daughter in a Supergirl outfit, and she seemed like a really nice mother and someone who was not afraid to admit that she was a mother, and I thought that was really, really nice. I think she just seemed like a wonderful female role model, and I think someone that anyone could get behind. And this was her first talk show appearance ever on Ellen DeGeneres, and she was very charming, seemed very real, not scripted. And I'm surprised that, knowing how good she, I thought that Warner Brothers was hiding her because she wasn't good, on camera by herself. And when you see this, you're like, why have you not been putting Gal Gadot out there? I mean, I guess they don't want her to overshadow the people whose movie it's supposed to be, Batman and Superman. But they had the Omaze campaign, for instance, with Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, and Jesse Eisenberg doing those funny videos. With all due respect to Jesse Eisenberg, why didn't they do Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, and Gal Gadot? I think the Trinity is a big selling point in this movie, that the Trinity appears on screen for the first time. Of course, I'm talking about the DC Trinity: Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman. But we'll see. We'll see how good she is in the movie. I have very high hopes for her. I think she's going to be excellent. I think she's going to knock it out of the park. But seeing her on Ellen made me feel better about her standalone movie as well, because she seemed like Wonder Woman, basically. It's good casting. They say 90% of directing with actors is casting, and I think that Zack Snyder did a really good job with this one. All right, so enjoy that interview. That's the second story of the day. The third story of the day is that the Academy has hired some diversity governors. They said they were going to hire more, non-white people, basically, to their board to help run the organization, to further bring in more diversity. Well, they've selected those individuals. So they've been under a lot of fire. They had to apologize for the Asian joke that Chris Rock made during the telecast. And I think that George Takei, actually, interestingly enough, he's obviously, I think, a great spokesperson for diversity, but he's been very vocal about this. And, good for him for, standing up for it. But he's been very vocal to the press saying, I think the Academy is very short-sighted in their definition of diversity, because there are a lot of people who need to be represented, not just black talent, but Asian talent, Hispanic talent, and he said LGBT talent, and even in today's environment, Arab American, not just Arab American talent, Arab talent. And I thought that was very good comments from George Takei. So anyway, here are the new governors. But first, let me tell you what a governor is, because that's what I was wondering. I was like, what is the point of this post? So there are 3 governors from each of the 17 branches of the Academy. It's a little bit like the Hunger Games, where there are different districts. And so there's like the casting director district, and the writing district, and the directing district, and the animation district. It sounds awesome. They should present it this way. They would have more fans. But anyway, you have 3 governors from each of the 17 branches, and they're supposed to attend 6 to 7 meetings a year. And they can do it via Skype if they're not in town. So each term is for 3 years, and you can serve a max of 3 terms, so 9 years total on the board. Now, if you're on the Board of Governors, you don't run the day-to-day operations of the Academy, but they come together to make the big decisions going forward, like, should we have more diversity and stuff like that. They also oversee their own branches and help decide who gets picked to join those branches. So I thought that was interesting that a lot of the invites into the Academy are done at like a second-tier level. So anyway, these are the people they've picked. They picked a writer, Gregory Nava, who is of Hispanic heritage. They picked Jennifer Yu Nelson for animation, Kung Fu Panda 2 director. I think that's a really good choice. And it's interesting they picked an Asian person because, of course, of that controversy over what Chris Rock said. So that was, I think, a good idea. But then also they picked Reginald Hudlin and for the director's branch. But Reginald Hudlin produced this year's telecast, and he approved the Asian joke. He didn't say, hey, Chris, I think you're crossing a line and that's not appropriate. So I would question his judgment, perhaps, if he's maybe the right attitude that they want in the Board of Governors. We'll see if things actually change. We'll know next year's Oscar nominations. I'll believe it when I see it. But I think this is somewhat encouraging. I'm curious, how do you feel about it? Do you think it's somewhat encouraging? Change is very difficult. It's very difficult, especially because you discover once you get inside the system, you're like, well, why would I now change the system? Like, you can't change the system unless you can change it from inside. And once you get inside, you're like, well, why would I change all the things that now benefit me, right? It's very difficult. And it takes, some real personal strength to be like, okay, I'm gonna risk it all, even though I finally got in. So it's very hard, and I think we should be understanding of that dilemma, that personal dilemma for everybody. Not understanding to the point of forgiveness, but why it's taking some time. I also feel that people should think of that when they're doing their rhetoric. I think people often get very angry when they want people to change, and they're like, just change. And I think that if people were more sensitive to what's on the line for the people who have to instigate the change, they would maybe have more compelling conversations with them, right? Instead of them being like, you're horrible, you're not making change, and the other side going, you don't know what you're asking of me, and then everyone just saying they hate each other. So I think that if you had like real discussions and saying, I know what's at stake for you, let's come up with a way that you can salvage some of what you have, but you can help everyone else, I think that would be the way to go. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. The viewer question actually builds on yesterday's. Johnny asked me about breaking into screenwriting, and I got a couple of people who asked me about this, so that's why I wanted to pick this question, but I picked the specific question from Juan Pablo Rueda. And Juan Pablo said, regarding the viewer question, any advice for those of us out of the U.S. where film school doesn't actually exist? This also is going to apply to people who, are past school age and don't want to go back to school. For, perhaps, just life reasons, monetary reasons, etc. Because I focused on Johnny, who's just entering college, and I realized that I probably gave some advice that's scary to people who are past that point. So anyway, Juan said, that's why I wanted to take Juan's question. So Juan said, I want to be a screenwriter, but it's pretty hard down here. I studied design and communication and took a screenwriting class too, but I have to save a lot of money to pay for any program in the U.S. I'm working as a creative writer for an advertising agency in the meantime. Great first step, Juan Pablo. The fact that your job involves writing, I think, is really spectacular, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Now, what are the paths into being a screenwriter if you do not go to film school and you can't build on the connections that you would make there? All right. The first thing is anyone can enter a screenwriting competition. So, and I believe from any country. So it's important to, and also you can do the blacklist, which I've talked about many times. You can go onto the blacklist, which is now accepting submissions from the general public, and for the top quality screenplays that they accept, they will go on the blacklist. And that's something that producers comb over on a regular basis looking for screenplays. The blacklist is supposed to be the list of the best unproduced screenplays. So that's something that you can do. You can submit screenplays to screenwriting competitions, and you can also submit screenplays to the blacklist. Now, the other thing you can do is in your country, I'm sure, even if it's not thriving, you have a film industry. You can try and get a script sold to somebody who's making movies where you are. And then, at the very least, if it gets produced and distributed, even just within your nation, you can then go to Hollywood or an agent and say, I have a movie that came out. Hollywood does pay attention to foreign film because they like to rip it off so often, right? Or cherry pick talent from it. So that's something else that you can do. I also think that you should consider other ways to get yourself a name writer ability. You could write a comic book. You could be self-published if you want, and then you could eventually maybe get a writing gig at one of the big two, or even get an image comic if you can maybe save some money. I'm sure getting an image comic is expensive because you have to pay for all of them upfront costs yourself, but at the same time, I'm sure it's less than having to attend film school in a different country. So you could do a comic, and comic book companies take talent from all over the world. Hard industry to break into, though. If you live in a country where they have comic book conventions, you should go to them. So that's one thing that's another thing you can do. You can try and break in through comic books. You can write a book. You can write an ebook. Look at The Martian. That was an ebook. And now it's a movie. And that guy got a lot of, he didn't get to write the screenplay, but that's changing more and more where the novelist can write the screenplay. But still, that was a huge career push for him. It made him even more of a legitimate writer. And he, nobody would publish his book. He got it out there himself. So that's something that you can do. So I would just say if you really want to write, you just have to get your work out there, and you have to get some success factor before Hollywood will take a risk on you, whether it be winning a screenwriting competition, getting on the blacklist, having something published, or at least having a lot of sales for your ebook or readership, getting some kind of comic out there. Hollywood doesn't like to take risks, right? Also, there are writing fellowship programs that I think you could probably apply to as well. Like Disney, for instance, has a very strong writers program. And especially if you're a creative writer at an advertising agency, I think that's something that would interest them. They've taken people from, and also Sundance has a writers institute as well, but I think that's pretty cliquey. I think you have to know somebody to get into that. But anyway, just, Hollywood, you need to be able to point something and say, look, this vouches for me. And then Hollywood will say, okay, I will consider you. And also it's how they kind of Hollywood doesn't, they don't really want to develop talent, unfortunately, outside of the competitions they already have set out. So this is kind of how they filter people out, right, to see who's serious and who actually has who's a professional, because you present them with some professional success. But I do think your creative writing at an advertising agency, advertising is an old school path into the movie business. Often directors will come from directing commercials, and I think, that's not a bad place to start at all, Juan Pablo. So good first step. But for everybody who's not in school, I hope that this has been helpful to you as well. Because I think that it's never too late to try and change your life. As long as you're fiscally responsible, you make sure you can meet your bills, that you have a job that can hold you over in the interim. But if you want to try and reach for that gold ring or the bronze ring, you should never feel that your chance has gone by. If you're still alive, you still have a chance. Just be smart about it, be methodical, and realize that these things take time. Overnight successes aren't real. They're just something that Hollywood and the media dream up to sell papers. Or these days, get you to click. All right, so that's today's Morning Movie News. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, any thoughts you have on screenwriting past film school, and of course, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.